right? And so I just want to start off by recognizing the fact that it's easily to be offended in our society right now. In fact, I saw it happen a couple weeks ago. We were leaving my house, and we were running late. My son Elliot was going to swim lessons, and so we loaded everybody up in the car. We drove to swim lessons, but we didn't really get a chance to eat dinner before we got there. It was one of those moments where I grabbed like granola bars and was like, here you go. And he's like, what? And I'm like, this is what we get, you know? And so then we drove down, we did our swim lessons, and on the way back, my son was like, hey, Dad, can we stop and get a cheeseburger somewhere, which is like one of his favorite things. And I was like, sure, son, you didn't get dinner. Let's stop. Let's get a cheeseburger, okay? So we pull into the drive-thru, and this is one of those drive-thrus that's like typical drive-thrus around here. There's 2 lanes, right? 2 places to order, and then it merges into 1 lane to pay and pick up your food. So here's what happened. I order my food, kind of pull forward, and then this whole commotion happens behind me. And I kind of pick up on what happened. There was an inside lane car and an outside lane car. And what happened is the outside lane car ordered their food first. And then the inside lane car ordered food. But the traffic was so backed up, no one could really pull forward. So when the gap opened up, you know what happened? The inside lane car, who ordered second, was like, exactly. And the outside lane car was like honking a horn, rolling down their window, yelling at them, giving them the "you're number 1" finger, you know, like all this kind of stuff. And my son's in the back of the car, and he's like, Dad, is that about us? You know, I'm like, no, it's not about us. But man, that's like going through the drive-thru, right? Like you're going to get your food in 2 minutes regardless. It doesn't matter. You're just like one car behind somebody else. But man, we get easily offended. How many of you would agree that our society, we get easily offended? We get easily offended over several things. Yes, we do. And I think this is true. All you have to do is hop on social media to realize that people get easily offended. Now, the reality is you may see that as someone else getting offended, maybe not you, but maybe you get offended in just slightly different ways. Like maybe you get offended when someone rolls their eyes at you. Like you're talking and they just give you the whatever, you know, roll of eyes. Maybe for you it's a tone of voice that someone has with you. Maybe it's someone not saying thank you when you helped them and you're like, okay, you know, like you get offended at them. Or maybe it's this, someone not responding to a text. Like you sent it, they read it, you saw the dots, and then nothing happened. And you're like, why will Kevin not text me back? All right? Many of you have probably said that before. But we live in an age where it's so easy to be offended, and we're quick to be offended. And sometimes they can be small things. But guys, other times our offenses, or the offenses that happen to us, can actually be pretty big things. Like, for example, maybe for some of you it started on a Friday night where no one in your friend group made plans for that night. So you stayed home, kicked back, flipped on some, Netflix or something like that, eating your hot Cheetos, all right, just chilling. And then you come to realize that everyone else is hanging out. You start to see the pictures popping up on your Instagram feed. And you weren't invited. That hurts. That hurts. And maybe like publicly you shrugged it off, like, oh, it's no big deal, guys, but it still bothers you because they ruined your Friday night. Everyone was invited except you, and now you're reevaluating your so-called friends, right? You're thinking about it. Maybe it started for you when one of your supposed friends talked bad about you to one of your least favorite people at school. And now word has gotten around about your reputation, and gossip has spread through the school and of things that you didn't want people to know about, and now you're just mad. You thought that this friend had your back, but they just exposed you in front of everybody. Or maybe for you, it's with your parents. When you're like talking to your parents and you're like, hey, there's this great get-together of friends or this great party I really want to go to, and your parents, before you even finish the sentence, were like, no. Or you're like, hey, can I borrow the car too? And they're like, no. Hey, can I go? No. And you just keep hearing that word over and over again, and you start to feel the offense come into your life. Maybe for you, it's your siblings that are on your offense list, your hit list. You remember, like, for some of you who have siblings, like if there's two sisters in this room, maybe your younger sister, it's always the younger sister, that borrows the clothes and then goes out to eat or something like that, spills salsa all on your favorite shirt, comes home, it's like, sorry, and doesn't really, like, apologize, but kind of apologizes, and you're just like, how dare you? You know, that was my favorite shirt. Or maybe for you, you're the oldest kid in the family, all right? Raise your hand if you're the oldest kid in the family, all right? How many of you are like the Uber for your family, all right? Where you are like driving everyone around all the time, except you don't even get paid for it. You're just like, oh, can you go pick up your brother or your sister from school, take them to basketball practice, and they got soccer practice at 4 o'clock, then you need to feed them dinner through the drive-thru. And you're like, what just happened? Like, just because I got my license, I became like the Uber for my younger siblings. All right, yeah. So here's the deal. We all get offended. We live in a society that is highly offended. And oftentimes the word we use that holds on to offense is a grudge. And if we're not careful, we can let grudges towards someone else often just kind of infect our lives. The Bible actually uses a different word than grudge. It actually uses the word bitterness. When you're hurt, when you're frustrated, when you're offended, it's easy to let something like bitterness grow in your heart towards that person or even towards a whole group of people. And sometimes we can get to the place where we think it feels sweet to actually be bitter towards those people. And so instead of just reacting however we feel in the moment, here's what I want us to ask the question. I want to ask you the question, what do you do with the worst stuff when it happens to you? Specifically, what is your attitude or your approach towards the people who have hurt you or wronged you in the past? You know, bitterness is not a new concept. Pretty much since humanity has existed, there has been bitterness. And the Bible actually addresses the effects that bitterness and hatred have on us and how we should handle it with people who hurt or offend us or even frustrate us. We find this actually in the book of Hebrews, the effects of bitterness in our lives. And before we read this passage, let me give you a little bit of context as to where we're picking up in the story. So the book of Hebrews is after Jesus has died, buried, and rose again. The church has begun. Jesus has ascended up into heaven, and we are sharing the message of Jesus with the world. And the author of Hebrews was writing this to Jewish Christians to try to show how Jesus is different than everyone else. He's far superior and greater than everyone else, and how to walk and live the Christian faith. So this is at the end of, kind of towards the end of the book, and here's what it says, Hebrews 12, verses 14 and 15. It says, make every effort, make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. Man, this is a hard verse when it comes to following Jesus in so many ways because it starts off by just saying make every effort. Like, don't write people off, don't cancel people, make every effort to live at peace with the people in your life, to be holy. That means pursue God with your life above all else, and see to it that no one falls short of the grace of God. And then it gets into this, no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. And I want to dive into the last part of that passage. You see, the author of Hebrews is quoting something from Deuteronomy 29, verse 18. And he's actually talking about how the nation of Israel would oftentimes turn away from God and then complain that God wasn't providing for them. So it'd be like, God, I want you to give me stuff, but I don't want to do anything to follow you at all. It's very ungrateful. And so they would complain, and bitterness would grow in their hearts towards God. But I believe that the two effects of bitterness in here that they have towards God are also true in our own lives that we can have towards other people. And here's what they are. It says trouble and defile many. That's what bitterness can grow in you. So in other words, I would say it this way. Bitterness grinds on you and grows in you. That's the word trouble. It causes trouble. In the original language, here's what it means. It means to continually and constantly annoy. Like, think about, have you guys ever, like, sharpened anything on a grinder? Or maybe used sandpaper before, where just that, just constantly, that grinding feeling. That's what bitterness does in you. Because here's what you're doing. Every time you think about the time that person hurt you, every time you see that person, it brings back those emotions and those feelings, and you're replaying the hurt over and over and over and over in your head. And what is it doing? It's growing your anger. It's growing your hatred. It's growing your frustration with that person, right? And even though the event or what they did may have been years ago, you're still playing it over and over and over. And it's just grinding on you over and over again. And that bitterness grows. It produces fruits of anger and suspicion and depression and jealousy and resentment. But also this, bitterness doesn't stay with that person. Some of you know what this is like. Like, you may be bitter at a sibling, but you're yelling at your parents. You may be bitter at a friend that's on the team, but you're yelling at your other friends. It doesn't just stay with them. It grinds on you, and it grows in you. Second, the Hebrew author says this: bitterness defiles many. And here's how I want to put this. Bitterness will ruin your character. It'll ruin it. The word defile, it means to stain something. So imagine for a moment, like, let's say you're wearing a crisp white shirt, right? And it's your favorite shirt in the whole world. And you decide to go out to eat with some friends. Of course, they want to go to a pasta place. And you're like, okay, sure, whatever. I'm wearing a white shirt. And then you find out the pasta place only has spaghetti with red sauce. And so you sit down and you try the twirl fork thing, but it's just not working. And so you start slurping the noodles. And what happens when you slurp the noodles? All right, it comes all down your front, right? All the little spots of red sauce on your favorite white shirt are there all of a sudden. So you go home and you're like, oh man, I got to clean this out. You try to clean it. It doesn't work. It goes from red to orange and it just looks worse. And you put it in the dryer on accident. So now the stains are all set in. And you realize, I can't use this shirt anymore. It is stained and it is ruined. That is a picture of what this word defile means. When you hold bitterness in your heart, you are letting your character be corrupted by what I would call moral filth. And here's what I mean by this. When you see the person that has harmed you, you are thinking all kinds of things that go completely against about how God feels about that person and about how Jesus wants you to treat that person. So instead of loving them, I'm like, I wish that you would die by a lightning bolt right now. Actually, you know what? No, that's too quick. I want you to get struck by lightning, and then I want a badger to come out of the woods and gnaw your leg off. And then I want you like you just, what you're thinking in those moments is moral filth. It's filth. It's evil. It's wrong. There's a guy named Charles Swindoll who wrote this about bitterness. He said this. He said, bitterness soaks into the basement of our lives like runoff from a broken sewer pipe. And every form of ugliness begins to float to the surface of those murky waters. Prejudice, profanity, suspicion, hate, cruelty, cynicism. There is no torrent like the inner torment of bitterness, which is a byproduct of an unforgiving spirit. It refuses to be soothed. It refuses to be healed. It refuses to forget. And there is no prison more damaging than the bars of bitterness that will not let the battle end. Bitterness ruins your character. Here's the point that I want you to understand. We think it's sweet to be bitter when people hurt us, but the reality is that bitterness hurts you the most. Bitterness is a prison of your own making. I've heard it said this way before, that holding on to bitterness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Or being bitter at someone's like picking up a hot coal to throw at your enemy, but you only end up burning yourself. I mean, here's another way to say it. The more you hold on to a grudge, the more the grudge holds on to you. All right, I need a couple of volunteers for this next thing. I think I had a couple. Is Taylor going to come up here? And is Holton, is he here somewhere? Was he going to come up too? No? Okay, I need another volunteer. Oh, you're right there. Yeah, you get to now. All right, come on up here, guys. Come on up here. All right, give them a round of applause so they can feel good about themselves, all right? Okay. Taylor, tell us what grade you're in.
I'm 10th grade.
10th grade. All right, Holton, tell us what grade you're in.
I'm also a 10th grader.
10th grader. All right. Way to go, guys. You've got a fan club already. It's fantastic. So let's, you guys don't have to do anything. You just have to stand here, and you're going to have to hold some things. But here's what I want to do. I want to pretend for a moment that Talon and Holton, let's just say that they're friends, okay? And they like hanging out together. They like doing things together. Obviously, very different approach to fashion, right? But let's say for a moment that Talon does something to Holton that offends you. Like you get angry about it. I don't know, like he kicked your dog or something like that, all right? All right. I don't know, that's the best I could come up with in this moment. Okay? That's pretty rough, okay. Or let's do this. Let's just say he said something bad about you, all right? So he said something bad about you. You're angry, and you're mad because Talon is being a jerk, right? Yeah, show him your mad face. Yeah. Oh, now you're really getting mad because, okay. So you're mad. You're angry. Talon has offended you. So here's what happens. We start to view offenses like weights that we carry with us. All right? Go ahead and put that on an arm, all right? So he's offended you, and you're like, oh, how could he kick my dog? How could he say those things about me, like right now? Like, seriously, come on, man. Well, then what happens is you start seeing him around again. And like each time you see him, you replay the scenario in your mind. So now you got to have another one, all right? So you got to carry that one around with you. And you're like, I can't believe that happened. Why did I let that happen? Why can't I? Seriously, I keep playing it over in my head. And so then what happens is you start talking to your friends to recruit an army against Talon. So then now you're recounting the story for them where you're like, dude, like you don't understand how much he hurt me, how much with what he said really hurt me. So now you're like telling other people, all right? And you're like, man, I can't believe this stuff happened to me. And then you're like, you know what? It's not enough. Now I'm going to start like going on to Instagram and just like passively aggressively posting stuff like, I know who my real friends are, or things like that, and maybe, just maybe, he'll pick up on a little bit of what's happening here. So here we go. You got this, all right? Now here's the deal, guys. Here, I got you. You all right? You all right with that? You good? You good? How would it feel to live your life with all this weight? It'd be hard, right? It'd be very, very difficult. Who is being punished by the bitterness that they hold in their heart? It's Holton. He's the one carrying all the weight. He's the one that's replaying these things over, carrying the hatred, carrying the bitterness, carrying the anger towards Talon. And so who's the prisoner really in this situation? It's Holton. Guys, this is the point when I talk about bitterness, about how it weighs you down, how it saddles you with such a burden that the other person isn't experiencing, and it makes you a very unpleasant person to be around, but it also doesn't grow the fruit that God wants in your life. You guys get this? All right, give them a round of applause. Good job, Holden. Good job, Talon. I think this is why the Hebrew author says, don't let the root of bitterness come into your life. Because bitterness grows. Like, think about a little plant. If you were to walk up and there's a little tree, little sapling sticking up, super easy to pull out of the ground, right? Just pull it out. Nothing, no big deal. Imagine an oak tree that's 30 years old. Try to pull that out of the ground. It's just not going to happen. And the same thing's true for bitterness. The more you let it grow, the harder it is to root out of your life. So when we're angry, when we're hurt, when we're frustrated, when we're offended by someone else, how do we stop bitterness from coming up in us? I think the truth about this is found in Ephesians chapter 4. It's a letter that Paul wrote to the church in Ephesus, and here's what he says. Chapter 4, verse 31 and 32. It says, get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as Christ forgave you. How do you keep bitterness from taking root in your life? And the answer is forgiveness. Forgiveness. We tend to think of forgiveness as something that benefits the other person, but forgiveness actually benefits us. It does something in our own hearts. See, forgiveness is a conscious decision to let go of someone's debt to us and not expect them to make up for it. Like, yes, they owe you. Yes, they hurt you. Yes, truth is on your side. But forgiveness is something that is given. It's not something that is deserved. That's what makes it forgiveness. And when you forgive, it changes you. You're able to drop the weight off of the bitterness that you have towards somebody else. You're removing the poison, actually, from your own heart. And so next week, we're going to spend more time talking about how to forgive and what it looks like to forgive someone. But right now, I want to speak to the person who's in a situation right now that's being hurt by someone else, whether it's by abuse or neglect or something along those lines. And if that is you, here's what I want you to hear me clearly. I'm not saying that the person who is hurting you gets a free pass, right? Like, you can forgive someone, but they can still be held accountable to their actions. Forgiveness has more to do with your own heart towards that person than it does with them being held accountable from the hurt that they did in your life. And so oftentimes when I talk with students who are struggling with forgiveness and they're in a situation of abuse, the very first thing I say to them is, we have to get you to a safe place so you can find healing and actually start pursuing forgiveness in that direction. And so if that is you, I just want you to know that this is a safe space. These are safe people to share what's going on in your life. We're going to spend more, like I said, next week, but I want you to notice the end of Ephesians 4:32. It tells us why we choose to forgive in the first place. Yes, it helps us. Yes, it drops the weight off our shoulders, but ultimately we choose to forgive because Jesus forgave us. God became Jesus, died on the cross for our sins. He took the punishment for our mistakes to offer us forgiveness, to forgive our mess-ups and our hang-ups and our bad habits and our sins. And when you believe in Jesus and are baptized in his name, the Bible tells us that you experience the grace of God and the forgiveness of God in your life. And for some of you in this room, you need to experience that forgiveness before you can ever forgive someone else in your life. Because until you understand God's forgiveness for you, it's so hard to forgive people in this world. Forgiveness isn't a magic Band-Aid that fixes everything, but it does open the door to healing. And it also opens the door to what's called reconciling relationships or bringing peace to relationships. I want to end today by just asking you to look at your life right now and to see if you're holding on to some bitterness. So here's a quiz I just want you to think about in your own mind. You don't need to answer yes or no out loud. That'd be awkward. But I want you to think about if these things are true for you. It's a quiz to see if you have bitterness. Do you have arguments with someone in your head? Those internal conversations where you basically tell them off or tell them what's up? Are you giving a close friend or family member the silent treatment right now? Do you consistently subtweet comments in person or online to someone? Do you leave passive-aggressive comments on someone's Instagram pics or screenshot them and send them to other friends with snarky comments about them? Do you think about ways that you can pay someone back for what they did to you 6 months ago? If you answered yes to any of those questions, the likelihood is that you are dealing with bitterness in your own heart. And the Bible's very clear. Bitterness is a sin. Even though that you are right and you are justified, because God has forgiven us, we become people who forgive others. And some of you have been deeply hurt by people that you care about, and it makes things complicated because your hurt is justified by your anger. But I can promise you this, the only way that you can find freedom from your anger and resentment is through forgiveness, choosing to forgive, even when they don't deserve it, because that's what makes it forgiveness. It won't happen overnight, but here are the steps that you can take to start working towards this process of forgiveness. The first thing I would tell you this is acknowledge your feelings. You got to recognize what's going on in your own heart, right? You got to be able to say, here's how I was hurt. Here's what I think they owe me in the first place. Second, I would say don't let your feelings control you. So often when we are hurt, we just react. And we react with anger or revenge, or we react with gossiping, or however we're wired, we just react that way. And it's meant to hurt the other person or other people in our life. And instead of being held captive by your feelings, All right? Don't let them control you. Start thinking through, why am I feeling this way? And finally, I would tell you this, pursue forgiveness. Notice I didn't say just forgive, because forgiveness is a process by which you choose to forgive. Sometimes it's a daily thing that you have to remind yourself of. And I get it. Forgiving someone, it feels like the other person is getting something from you. But as we go to these community groups, I want you to ask yourself, what are you getting from holding on to your bitterness? If you could stop replaying the offense over and over and over in your mind, how much time would you get back in your life? If you could let go of your need to be right, how much less stress would you feel? If you could let go of your need to make things fair, what else could you be doing? I know this sounds unfair, and it is unfair, but that's how forgiveness works. Letting go actually changes you, and it releases you from this prison of resentment and bitterness. And honestly, what happens when we choose to forgive is we start showing people Jesus and what God's done for us.